When people think of secret agents, they think of fictional characters like James Bond or Ethan Hunt, jumping off of cliffs on motorcycles and breaking into the lair of an evil villain who's trying to dominate the world. In reality, agents from the CIA and MI5 are out there and they're trying to stop bad people from carrying out evil acts, but their job is far less spectacular than people would believe. They spend a good amount of time watching and waiting, not something you would pay to see a blockbuster movie about. Sometimes, though, the truth is stranger than fiction. On December 3, 1992, 2 bombs exploded in the center of Manchester, England. The first bomb detonated at 8:31 a.m. inside a car that was parked at Parsonage Gardens in the commercial district. It injured 6 people. At 10:09 a.m., the second bomb exploded near Manchester Cathedral. A further 58 people were injured in that bombing. Authorities received a call from someone claiming there were more bombs in the city, causing the police to evacuate, but no other bombs were found. The following day, the Provisional IRA claimed responsibility for the act. It was a time where the IRA was carrying out bombings throughout England, and it left most people on edge. Understandably, people were worried that a bomb could go off at any moment and they could be injured or killed. One man, however, didn't seem to fear the bombings. No, he had actually found them useful. The Swan is a pub that sits near the center of Newport, about an hour and 40 minutes south of Manchester. Like most pubs, it was frequented by young adults as they kicked back in their spare time and socialized. Being only 4 minutes from Harper Adams University, a local agricultural college, the pub was a regular hangout for students taking a break from studying farming and food marketing. 3 of the students that spent a good amount of time at the Swan were Sarah Smith, her boyfriend John Atkinson, and their roommate Maria Hendy. They lived with 3 other roommates at a house just a short walk from the pub, and they had made arrangements with the business to allow them to park their cars in the pub's parking lot since their house didn't have any parking spots. They promised to give all of their business to the pub and to bring in all of their friends. The barman, Robert Freeman, agreed, and over time he and the students became good friends. Robert began pushing the idea that the IRA was working in the area. He reminded them that there had been 4 bombs detonated in Shrewsbury only 40 minutes west, the past August. He also made sure they remembered that one of their fellow students had been suspected to have been running guns for the IRA. Based on what Robert was telling them, the IRA was closer than ever. One night in 1993, Robert was closing up the pub and John was finishing off his beer, preparing to head home. Robert started telling John that 1 in every 5 students at Harper Adams University was Irish, a claim that may or may not have been true. He explained to John that the agricultural school was attractive to IRA members because they could get fertilizer there to make bombs. There was a very specific reason why Robert was pushing the fear of the IRA onto John. He was about to tell him an unbelievable story, and the fear he was priming him with would make him more easily believe that story. After John had finished his beer and Robert locked up the bar, the 2 headed upstairs to the flat that Robert lived in above the pub. Once inside, Rob sat down and started hinting that there was something bigger going on there. He said things like, quote, "You think I'd choose to live in a dump like this?" End quote. "You think I live in a hole of a town like this?" When John failed to pick up on Robert's hints, he finally gave in and told his friend that he was an undercover MI5 agent and he was investigating an IRA cell that was operating at Harper Adams University. Days later, in the cellar of the pub, Robert made John swear to secrecy and told him all about the undercover operation he was part of. Then he told John that he needed his help. He needed John to work undercover at the school to try and gather information that MI5 could use to confirm the members of the IRA cell. John wanted to do his part to help save lives, but he wasn't sure if he was qualified to do the job. That's when Robert offered him training and a whole lot of money when the job was done. "The police always take care of their own," Rob promised John. Then he blindfolded John and started punching him in the face and abdomen. He was supposedly training to teach him how to take a punch. Robert would also go on to teach John how to throw a punch, but he claimed that taking a punch was just as important. After that, John began working at the pub and reporting the information he had discovered at the school to Robert. He would walk around the parking lot writing down license plate numbers so MI5 could do background checks on the owners. John withdrew from his friends and spent all of his time either at school or at the pub. On March 15, 1993, Robert approached John and said, quote, "We've got trouble." He told his trainee that the IRA was onto him and they were likely onto John too. By then, Robert had started dating Maria Hendy and he told John that their girlfriends were also in danger. They all needed to get out of town for a while, but the women couldn't know the truth. He explained that John needed to tell them a lie that would make them agree to leave with them. He said that they just needed to lay low for a month and then the police were going to make a bunch of arrests. Then they would be safe to return. In the middle of the day, Sarah and Maria got an urgent message while they were in class and they went to the Swan to see what the problem was. They were kind of in a hurry because they wanted to get back to school, but then John dropped a bombshell. He was dying. The two women couldn't believe what they were hearing. John went on to tell them that he had liver cancer and that it was too advanced for treatment. He told them that he only had a few months to live. He said that he had a final request, and that was for the two couples to go on a month-long holiday together where he could carry out a sort of bucket list. Over the next 2 weeks, the four prepared for the trip, John and Robert knowing that they were going to be evading the IRA, and Sarah and Maria believing they were saying goodbye to John. They traveled by car and by train to various places around the UK. It was nice to be with friends, but the thought of John's death looming made the trip bittersweet. After 10 days of traveling, Robert sat the women down and told them that they needed to know the truth. John was not in fact dying. They were on the run from the IRA. He explained that he was an agent with MI5 and that his cover was blown, putting all of their lives in danger. He claimed there were contracts out to have them all killed and they had to keep moving. Unlike John, Sarah was immediately skeptical. She asked to see some ID, but Rob explained that undercover agents don't carry ID. It was actually a valid point. Then he proceeded to tell Sarah how much money was in her bank accounts and the location of some land owned by her parents, claiming that he got the information from the government. The four friends left at the beginning of spring break at the university, and Sarah had told her parents that she was just doing some traveling for the break. But when the school called looking for her, they became suspicious. Her father, Peter, started calling around and found out that John and Maria hadn't returned to school either, and the new owner of the Swan believed that Robert had stolen money before taking off. While gathering information, he learned that John had claimed he was dying not long before the two couples disappeared. Peter didn't believe that John was dying, and he was beginning to think that Robert was pulling the strings of something nefarious. Robert Freegard was born March 1st, 1971 in Derbyshire, England. His father was a nurse at Sheffield Hospital, but the two didn't meet until Robert was 16 years old. His primary school teacher would say that he didn't act the same as the other boys in class. She said he was quite charming at a young age. Robert left school at 15 and drifted through life working as a laborer before becoming a car salesman. In 1992, when he was 20 years old, he met a 26-year-old teacher named Allison Hopkins, and it said that she was his first girlfriend. They only dated for 9 months before she discovered that he had broken into her home, stolen her bank card, and withdrew £600 from her account. The worst part was that he used some of that stolen money to pay back money he had borrowed from her. After she dumped him, Robert started stalking the teacher and allegedly tried to hire a couple of guys to kidnap her. He was eventually charged with theft but didn't receive jail time. He was charged with incitement to kidnap, but the charges were dropped. Soon after, he got the job at the Swan in Newport and he used the position to hunt for someone to con. He found his victim in John Atkinson and, by extension, Sarah Smith and Maria Hendy. Robert had been so successful at convincing the 3 students that he was in MI5 and that they were in danger that they ended up giving him all of their money. Sarah had an inheritance worth over £200,000 and Robert told her MI5 wanted her to withdraw the money. She snuck into her parents' house one evening so she could get her passport, which she would need to withdraw the money. When she opened her parents' safe, the passport was gone. It turned out that her father's suspicion had caused him to move Sarah's personal documents because he knew that Robert was after her money. He had talked to the Atkinsons and they told him that John was in hiding from the IRA and that he needed money to pay them off. Money they had paid. Peter immediately knew that Robert was using his daughter and her friends as pawns in a scam to get money, and that's when he moved the passport. Over the years, they stayed in hiding and Robert continued to control every aspect of John, Sarah, and Maria's lives. He would eventually change his last name to Hendy-Freegard, and Maria would give birth to their 2 children. In August of 1998, 4.5 years after they had first left Newport, Robert told Sarah that the government wasn't happy about how much money they were spending to keep her in hiding and that she needed to get the inheritance money. They went to a payphone and called her parents, but of course her father said no. Peter told his daughter not to trust Robert, but she insisted he was telling the truth. After that, Robert made Sarah repeatedly call her parents' house over and over again, day and night, for weeks. Sarah's mother gave in and told Peter to give her the money. Their farm had been in debt, so the account wasn't as full as it had been years before, but Robert ended up getting £44,000 from Sarah. Robert wasn't only getting money from Sarah and her parents. John's parents were also making continual payments for their son's protection, which totaled almost £400,000 over the years. He had split the couples up, and John and Maria were staying in one place while he and Sarah stayed somewhere else. He would tell Sarah that he was going on a mission and would leave for weeks at a time, explaining that she was not to go out or answer the door for anyone. Obviously, Robert was not out on a mission. He was out conning more people, specifically women. In 1995, he met a woman named Elizabeth Bartholomew at a car dealership, and she was married but in the process of a divorce, so the two began dating. On a weekend getaway, Robert got Elizabeth drunk, and after she blacked out, he took photographs of her nude. The following morning, he told her he would use the photographs if she didn't do everything he said. He made her change her last name to Richardson and run away with him to assist him in being a spy. Then he had her take out £14,000 in loans, which he took for himself. Their relationship went on for years and eventually had Elizabeth living on the street, surviving on only £1 a week. In 1996, Robert met a woman named Leslie Gardner, and he told her that he needed money to pay off IRA assassins who had been released after the Good Friday Agreement. She paid him £16,000 over 6 years. He also sold her car and pocketed the money. He met Caroline Cowper in 2000 while he was working at a car dealership, and he conned her into trading in her car for a different car and taking out a new loan which allowed him to pocket £10,000. Then they started dating, but she eventually discovered that he had stolen £14,000 from her bank account. Caroline was a lawyer, so she decided to sue him for the money, and in the process of investigating his past, she found out about the other women he had conned and got police involved. In 2002, he met a child psychologist named Kimberly Adams, and after finding out that her stepfather had won a large sum of money in the lottery, he convinced her to quit her job and become a spy with him. He managed to get her family to pay some money for spy school, but it would ultimately be her family that brought his reign of thefts to an end. Somewhat. While Sarah was being moved around and controlled by Robert over the years, his interest in John and Maria had waned. Maria had eventually left Robert, and John had been spending more and more time on his family's farm. He would only go out for short stays at first, since he believed the IRA would definitely look for him there. But as those trips became longer, he began to realize that nobody was looking for him. And when Rob stopped communicating with him, John came to the realization it was all a scam and that he had gotten Sarah and Maria involved. Out of guilt, John wrote a letter to Sarah's father and told him everything that had happened and that he believed it had been a con. Unfortunately, he did not know where Sarah was and hadn't been in contact with her in some time. The letter was more confirmation of what Peter already knew, and he put the letter with all of the other documents he had gathered about Robert Freegard and the disappearance of his daughter. While that was happening, Sarah was in a small cottage locked in a bathroom. She had no idea where she was. All she knew was that the sun had gone up and down many times while she was there. For 3 weeks, Robert kept Sarah locked inside the bathroom, letting her out for a few hours at a time to clean the cottage, then forcing her back into the bathroom. He barely let her eat. There was no heat in the house. She just remained a prisoner. Finally, he returned to the cottage and frantically pulled Sarah out of the bathroom. Like so many times over the years, she was being moved to another unknown location. It ended up being the house that Kimberly had been subletting while the owner was traveling, but she was no longer there. Robert had convinced her to cut ties with everyone she knew and took her somewhere else. Sarah was supposed to stay inside and keep the house clean, which is what she did. That was until the homeowner returned and kicked her out. Peter had spoken to Allison Hopkins' mother early on in his investigation, and in 2002 she called him and let him know that she had some new information. She gave him the details of Caroline Cowper and suggested they talk to see if they could help each other out. Peter immediately called Caroline, and though she didn't know anything about Sarah, she did have some details about a vehicle that he owned. Peter would end up sending Caroline a copy of the letter from John, and she would in turn give it to the police. By that point, the police were finally taking the complaints against Robert Freegard seriously. He was involved in the disappearance of Sarah Smith and frauds against multiple people. In February of 2003, investigators had seen a car outside of Robert's mother's house, and Detective Constable Mark Simpson was headed to the address where it was registered. Of course, Robert wasn't there, but the man who owned the house had a lot of information for the investigator. The man's name was Simon Proctor, and he told Mark that he had recently been renting the house out to a woman named Kimberly Adams, but she had recently disappeared with her boyfriend, Robert Freegard. Not only that, but when he had returned to his house after his travels, there was a different woman there claiming to be a friend of Kimberly's named Juliet Butler. He found her story suspicious and had kicked her out of the house. When the detective showed Simon a picture of Sarah, he confirmed that she was the mystery woman. When the detective questioned Kimberly's former co-workers, they explained that she had told them she was terminally ill and was going away, a story that was far too similar to what John Atkinson had told people 10 years prior. And like with John, Kimberly had gotten money from her parents, which was supposedly meant to pay for her to become a spy. You know, all those fees they charge when you start working for MI5. Rob and Kim had met with her father and told him that they were going to become lighthouse keepers in Scotland, and they would be doing it for 25 years. He admitted that they would only be lighthouse keepers in name because their actual job would be to monitor Russian submarine activity. They would make a lot of money in the position, but first Kimberly would have to pass an exam of some sort, and it would cost $35,000. Of course, they needed the money right away. Her father called her stepfather, the one who had won the lottery, and he agreed to front them the money. By the beginning of the following week, Robert was $35,000 richer. The problem that Detective Constable Simpson suddenly faced was that Kimberly was an American citizen who had immigrated to the UK, and her parents were living in Phoenix, Arizona. That's when Scotland Yard got into contact with the FBI, and the two agencies began working together to try and stop a serial con man and to find 2 missing women. A team of FBI agents went to Arizona to talk to Kimberly's parents. Of course, they told the agents that yes, their daughter was about to marry Robert Freegard, who was an agent with MI5, and that they were about to start working together in Scotland. As far as they knew, the entire story was legit, and they believed that Kimberly had a bright future ahead of her. It was then that the agents broke the news that Robert was not with MI5. He was actually a con man. He had conned multiple people, including them, out of large sums of money, and was responsible for another missing woman. The next thing they needed to do was to figure out a way to lure Robert out of hiding. In the US, the FBI started monitoring the phone calls between Robert and Kimberly and her parents. After some time, Robert and Kimberly told them that Kim had failed her exam and they needed more money to pay for another one. To put the pressure on them, Kimberly told her parents that her car needed repairs, but she couldn't afford them, so the mechanic was holding her passport as collateral. The FBI instructed the Adams to offer them money, but say that they would deliver the money in cash because they wanted to visit with their daughter. On May 23, 2003, Kimberly's mother Anne flew to Heathrow Airport in London with $10,000 in cash. She met Robert in the airport, but Kimberly wasn't with him. He said she was waiting in the car. They walked to the parking garage, being followed by undercover agents. Once they were outside and it was confirmed that Kim was in the car, Robert was arrested and taken into custody. Kimberly was confused, but when she saw her mother, she calmed down and they were able to convince her that Robert was actually a con man. When Robert was questioned, he refused to say anything. In his possession was a room key from the Buffalo Hotel in the French Alps. In that room, they found more of Robert's belongings along with a locked suitcase that was filled with evidence. Cell phones, passports, and credit cards that belonged to multiple other women. One of them was a woman named Renata Kister, who was living in London. Renata was one of the women that Robert had conned out of money over the years, and when she was brought in for questioning, she told the investigators a story that would finally put an end to a 10-year-long mystery. She explained that, after having not heard from Rob for a while, he called her and said he had a friend that was in trouble and needed somewhere to stay. He said she would clean her house in exchange for a room, and Renata agreed. She said she was told the woman's name was Carrie. She told them that Carrie had avoided having her picture taken, but she was able to snap a picture when she wasn't looking. It was from the side, but it resembled Sarah, so the detectives accompanied Renata back to her house to see for themselves. The minute the woman opened the door, DC Simpson knew it was her. He said, quote, "Hello, Sarah," and she just froze. He quickly explained that Robert was a con man, he was in custody, and that the IRA had never been looking for her. She left the house in shock and was reunited with her parents. On June 23, 2005, Robert Hendy-Freegard was convicted of 2 counts of kidnapping, 10 counts of theft, and 8 counts of deception. He was sentenced to life in prison. Now, I would love to say that Robert stayed in prison and wasn't able to hurt anyone else, but that unfortunately wasn't the case. In 2007, Robert appealed his sentence and his lawyer argued that convincing someone to go somewhere else couldn't be considered kidnapping, and the Court of Appeals agreed. They said it wasn't kidnapping because the victims were free to leave at any time and weren't locked up. But Sarah had been locked in a bathroom for 3 weeks. So I'm not sure why that didn't count, but Robert's life sentence was revoked and he was sentenced to 9 years for the other offenses. He was released from prison in 2009, and you won't be surprised to find out that he went right back to his old ways. In 2011, using the name David Hendy, he met a woman named Sandra Clifton, and over the years he manipulated Sandra into cutting off all ties with her family. He moved her away, and her family hasn't seen her in almost 10 years. Robert has publicly denied that he manipulated Sandra. If you want to know more about that story, you should watch the Netflix series The Puppet Master or read Sarah Smith's book, Deceived. Robert Hendy-Freegard, who has recently been going by David Clifton, claims that he isn't doing anything wrong right now, but it can't be denied that he negatively affected many people's lives throughout the years. The rescue of Sarah Smith was amazing, and she's made great strides in overcoming her ordeal. But Robert's story isn't over. We have to wonder why he's keeping his new partner hidden away, why he keeps changing his name, and how many other people he's been taking advantage of. No matter what name he uses, they will always belong to the same person, the con man, Robert Freegard. Thanks for watching This Is Monsters. New episodes are uploaded twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays. There are occasional bonus episodes covering unsolved cases and criminal history. If you have a suggestion for a case you think I should cover, leave it in the comments. You can always follow the channel on Instagram at thisis_monsters and purchase merch at thisismonsters.com. Thanks so much, and be safe.